Hi guys, this is Igor Ledochowski from the Hypnosis Training Academy. I hope you're doing well and have enjoyed the series on hypnotic negotiations so far. Today I wanted to give you an extra bonus video because there's something that can happen in negotiations. There's a couple of things that typically happen that can stall them and that have very easy solutions to them so that there's no need to get trapped or lost in these kind of situations. And today I want to go through the three top things that can go wrong in a negotiation and how to make sure it doesn't happen to you, or at least how to solve it when it does happen. Okay. The first one has everything to do with framing. Now, the kind of framing I'm talking about right now, especially in terms of how negotiation can fall apart, has to do with the idea of value. Now, here's the thing. Most people don't know how to value things until they are given a reasonable reason to value it in one way or another. Otherwise, they default to whatever is most convenient to them. So let me give you an example of what I mean by this. A long time ago now, in my much younger years, I used to be a lawyer. And I noticed I was very lucky. I worked for a very large law firm, one of the top law firms in the UK, an international law firm. And so when I got there, I thought I'd made it. I got in by the skin of my teeth, and I was delighted to be there, right? Now, within a relatively short period of time, I noticed that all my colleagues, in other words, the people taken into the law firm at the same time as me, there's about, I don't know, 20 or 30 of us, people started complaining about working conditions, about wages, salary especially. And I thought it was really interesting, especially when we went through a period, this is during the dot-com boom, where lawyers' salaries doubled, sometimes even tripled in the space of a year to compete with all the dot-com companies and so on. And we were no exception. Our salaries had a significant hike, not quite as high as some of the bigger players, some more experienced lawyers. And for a while, everyone was happy. But then again, after a little while, they started complaining again, saying how they're not being paid enough and so on. At the time, I just thought it was a curiosity. Some years later, after I left the law firm and became an executive coach, I was doing some work with a coaching company. So I was one of their coaches. They'd hire me out to their clientele. And it was nice. It was a nice little income on the side. Now, whilst I was working there, again, I noticed the exact same thing. The other coaches who were actually being paid really well, being paid 50% of their client fees, where the company was doing everything. They just had to show up, basically. I noticed the other coaches, again, starting to grumble and complain that weren't being paid enough and that the companies take too much of a chunk out of their fees and so on. And again, I realized that what they weren't seeing is the bigger picture here. They had no idea how to run a company. I was running my own executive coaching company. I knew how much effort it took to find a client, to write a sales copy, to advertise, to answer all their questions, to deal with payments and payment plans, to chase them if they aren't paying on time and so on. There's a huge amount of work that goes on. And all that's happening in the background. But they had no idea of this. And so all they had a sense was, well, I'm doing all the work, but I'm only paying half the pay. That doesn't seem very fair. And this is the crucial element. This is the bit that I want you to really remember when going into negotiation. Human beings have an inherent need for fairness. Whether it's a lawyer at a top-paying law firm, whether it's a coach giving free clients, essentially, or you're negotiating for a car or a deal on something, everyone wants to be treated fairly. And nobody thinks they're being treated fairly unless you spell out to them how they're being treated fairly. Let me give you a quick example of what I mean by this. Let's say that I was given a $10 bill, or actually $10, and under one condition. The condition is I have to share it with someone, right? It doesn't matter how much I share. It can be 1 cent penny. It can be $9. Doesn't really matter. But I have to share it with someone. If I don't manage to share it with someone, then I don't get anything. None of us gets anything. Okay, so with that in mind, how would you feel if I offered you $1? There you go. Here's $1 of the $10. How do you feel? Well, knowing the conditions, knowing that I have $10 and I'm only giving you one of them, most people would say, well, that's not very fair. Why do you get more than I do? But let's see if we can turn this on its head now. Remember, this is just the starting position. All they're comparing is the $1 to the $9. And so that's where people will typically get stuck on the unfairness of it all. But what if I approached it slightly differently? What if I framed the value, framed the fairness of this, something along the following lines? Listen, I've been given some money. I have to give a portion of that away, and I'd like you to be someone I give that away to. So would you like to be a person that I give $1 to, absolutely free? You have to do nothing for it. You just get to have the dollar. Sound good? Now, I've given you more or less the same information. Maybe I haven't necessarily talked about the $10. Maybe I can add that number in as well. It doesn't really matter too much. The point here is that by framing the idea of this is free money, you could do nothing for it, right? You're better off with this money than without it, of course. You don't have to do anything. But if you say no to it, well, then no one gets anything. You get zero. Now, with that thought in mind, having $1 is better than having nothing. So a lot of people, most people at that point will say, you know what, that sounds fair enough. Once again, that idea of fairness. Now, what am I trying to illustrate with this? Note, the exact same conditions. I keep $9, you get $1. In one scenario, you reject it. In the other scenario, you think it's fair and you accept it. So what's the difference in the two scenarios? It's framing the value, framing the fairness of the situation. If you feel you're being treated fair, you're more likely to accept the terms of the deal. So this is just a quick example, of course, but in negotiations, this fairness issue sometimes comes up overtly. People say that doesn't sound very fair. And sometimes it comes up more covertly. They just feel like they're getting a hard deal, and so they might start backing off from a negotiation. So whenever someone's backing off, or you get a sense that someone's distancing themselves from negotiation, just wind back the clock a little bit and ask yourself, at what point did things seem to go awry? And at those points, did I make a point of framing the fairness of the deal I was proposing or the exchange that we were offering? Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. That's the first thing that can go wrong, this idea of fairness. And fairness typically goes wrong not because the deal is unfair, it's more because the people doing the deal don't really know how to evaluate what they're getting and see the fairness within it. So that's our job to help communicate that. What's the second thing that can go wrong? The next thing is you can hit an impasse on a point, usually cash, right? Let's say I'm selling something, a widget, and I want $100 for it. I need $100 for it. But you can only afford $50. So I said, well, I need 100. And you say, well, I'm going to afford 50. And now we're in an impasse. You want it, I want to sell it. You are happy to pay for it, and I'm happy to accept money for it. I like doing the trade with you, so everything's working well. But where's the problem? You can only afford $50. You have a ceiling. And I need $100. I have a walk-away point. I have a minimum that I need to reach. So at this point, it seems like we can't do a deal. But the difference here is, the thing that I want you to remember when you get to a point like this is, there's always something else you can add. So let's say you can't afford more than $50. No problem, right? What else can you give me that is of equivalent value? This is the bit where a lot of people get stuck. They get stuck on the dollar value. So how do we know what equivalent value is? Well, the answer is simple. You ask. You say you need $100. What do you need it for? Now, let's say I need it for, I don't know, medication, right? And let's say that you happen to have access to medication at a 50% discount. So now I can buy the exact same medication for half price for the very $50 you're offering me. Why? Because I get what I want. I get the medication. You get what you want. You get the widget, whatever it was, at the price that you can afford. And we are both happy. So this is the second deal breaker fixer, if you will. And that is, if the negotiation gets stuck on a point, find out what it is they need about that. Find out what's behind that. Because chances are very high that the thing that you can't give but that they want, actually there's a true goal behind that. And there may be a good chance that you can do a deal on the actual thing that they need, not the thing that they say or think that they need. So that's our second way of breaking an impasse. One was fairness, and this one we can call fungibility. This is the idea that we can make an equivalent exchange of some kind. The third place in which we can break an impasse, and again, fairness is the theme here once again, and that is if someone's asking for something unreasonable, and you and they both know it's unreasonable, but they're asking for it anyways. Sometimes people can get stuck in that sense, right? So Perhaps you will try and explore what's going on there and then ask them if there's some fungible thing you can offer in exchange. In other words, let's say someone wants $1 million in half an hour. Okay, great. Maybe you can't do that, but maybe you can give them something else that is of equivalent value for them. Sure, that might be a possibility. But another thing you can do is basically force them to a position where they realize how unreasonable they're being, and then they withdraw that unreasonable request. So what do I mean by this? Well, let's take the example of a hostage negotiator, and the hostage taker, the terrorist, is saying, well, I want to have a helicopter here fueled up in 20 minutes, right? Can't be done. It takes a couple of hours to fuel the chopper, to find a pilot, then there needs at least half an hour to fly it over there from the airport, and that's on top of all the paperwork of getting the flight path cleared and getting cleared by other people and so on. So chances are very low you can do this. What do you do? Well, you can't just say no, because that might create antagonism. But you can force empathy. How do we do this? Well, very simply, you ask one simple question. How do you expect me to do that? Walk me through this, right? It takes 2 hours to fuel a plane. It takes 3 hours to find a pilot. It's the middle of the night. Get them up and get them in, ready for flight check. Take at least half an hour to get the plane here when it's actually ready. And that's supposing that I'm going to actually get permission from my supervisor. We can clear the flight plans, et cetera, et cetera. How do you suppose I should do that? Now, the key here is you don't ask this in a upset tone, in a whiny tone, or in an angry tone. There's no hostility that can go into it. The emotions must be totally, I'm being reasonable, help me out here. And here's one of the reasons why. Maybe there is actually a quick fix. Maybe, let's take an example of your boss asks you to do a piece of work, and you already have a huge amount of work doing for someone else, and you can't do both. You can't meet both deadlines. So you ask him, well, how do you suppose I should do that? Because I have this deadline, I've got that deadline. I can't do both. At which point your boss might turn around and say, oh, I see what you mean. I didn't realize that. Well, I'll have a chat to the other guy and I'll tell him that your deadline just got extended so you can do this for me, right? So they fix the problem for you very quickly. Or they realize that their request is unreasonable and they back out from it. So just to summarize once again, so to keep them clear in our mind, fairness can solve a lot of impasse, a lot of points where we get stuck. The first place we can get stuck in is if the other person feels that the deal is unfair, but only because they haven't really thought it through properly. That's a question of framing, of to frame them, the deal in such a way that they can understand it and see the relative fairness of it. Secondly, it's fungibles. If you get stuck on a negotiation point, find out what it is that they're going to get out of that and see if there's something else you can offer them. And the easiest way of thinking about this is if they get stuck on a price, well, it's rarely about the price. Usually you'll be able to find something else you can use to sweeten the deal with other than money if you don't have money to throw at them. Finally, it's the forced empathy. And forced empathy, again, is about fairness and reasonableness, which is when they're asking something unreasonable, ask them how they would deal with that situation or that request if they were in your shoes. And one or two things will happen. Either they'll come up with a genuine solution, in which case you go, great, I'll do that. Or they back off and say, well, I understand, yes, that's a little unreasonable. You can't do that. And when in recognizing the unreasonableness of the request, they usually alter the position and you can start negotiations again. Okay, with those three things, I hope you've enjoyed today's little lesson and apply it to your negotiations. Make them a little more hypnotic, a little more successful. Until next time, bye for now.